I thought my husband was just failing at work. Then I heard my dad on the phone telling someone, yeah, don't hire him. My chest tightened. One call turned into more. Names I recognized. Deals started dying. And the way he said it, calm. That's when it hit me. The truth was, I didn't move. That's the part that still bothers me when I replay that night in my head. I didn't storm into the room. I didn't throw the office door open and demand answers. I didn't even drop the takeout bag I was holding. I just stood there outside the half-closed door to my dad's office and listened. His voice was low, steady, almost friendly. The same tone he used at dinner parties when he wanted people to trust him before they realized what they were agreeing to. Look, I'm not saying he's incompetent, he said. I'm just saying I'd be careful before putting anything important in his hands. Then he let out a quiet laugh. Not loud. Not dramatic. Just satisfied. My fingers tightened around the paper bag until it crinkled. I recognized the name he said next. Michael Williams. Daniel had mentioned him 2 nights earlier while we were sitting at the kitchen table eating reheated pasta. He'd been careful with his excitement, like he didn't want to jinx it. If this one goes through, he said, I can finally breathe a little. Not celebrate. Not relax. Just breathe. That was how bad things had gotten. And now my dad was in his office in Center City, casually making sure that didn't happen. I backed away before he could see me. I left the food on the entry table and walked straight out of the building like I'd forgotten something in my car. My heels hit the floor too fast, too sharp. The front desk smiled at me and said my name, and I smiled back like everything was normal. It wasn't. By the time I got into my car, my hands were shaking so badly I had to grip the steering wheel just to keep them still. Because suddenly, everything that didn't make sense did. It hadn't been one bad week. Or even a bad month. It had been building. Slowly. Quietly. In a way that made it look like Daniel was the problem. At first, it was small things. A client taking longer than usual to respond. A follow-up email that never got answered. A meeting that got postponed and never rescheduled. Normal things. Annoying, but normal. Daniel brushed it off at first. He always did. He wasn't the type to complain. If something went wrong, he assumed there was a reason. If someone didn't respond, he gave them time. If a deal fell through, he blamed timing. But then it kept happening. More often. Closer together. I remember one night, about 3 weeks before I overheard that call, when he came home later than usual. Not late enough to be suspicious. Just late enough that I noticed. He dropped his keys on the counter and stood there for a second longer than normal, like he needed a second to switch back into being home. How was it? I asked. He shrugged, but it wasn't a casual shrug. Fine. Just weird. Weird. That was the word he started using more and more. What do you mean? I asked. He opened the fridge, stared inside without really looking at anything, then closed it again. I had a meeting with this guy, Michael Williams. Electrical contractor. Solid company. We've been talking for a couple weeks. Everything was lining up. He paused. Then I get there and he's off. Off how? Daniel rubbed the back of his neck, thinking. Like he already made a decision, but didn't want to say it directly. He kept asking these questions that didn't really make sense. Stuff about reliability. Long-term consistency. Like he was trying to confirm something. My stomach tightened even now remembering it. What did you say? I asked. What could I say? He replied, letting out a short breath. I answered everything. Showed him my past work. Explained my process. But it didn't matter. I could feel it. Feel what? That I'd already lost it. He didn't sound angry. That would have been easier. He sounded confused. And that was worse. I probably said something wrong, he added, almost as an afterthought. I remember sitting there, watching him try to make sense of something that wasn't his fault. And I let him. Because at that point, I didn't know. Or maybe I just didn't connect it yet. After that, it wasn't just Michael. There was another client who stopped returning calls after weeks of back and forth. Then another who suddenly said they were going in a different direction. Then a contract Daniel was sure was locked and just disappeared. No explanation. No warning. Just gone. Each time, Daniel handled it the same way. He stayed calm. He stayed professional. And then later, when it was just us, he'd sit at the kitchen table with his laptop open and go over everything again, like there was something he missed. Maybe I should have followed up sooner. Maybe I came across too pushy. Maybe I should have adjusted the pricing. It was always maybe. Always something he could fix. Something he could control. And I sat there with him, offering suggestions, telling him it would turn around, believing it. Because it didn't make sense for it not to. Daniel was good at what he did. Not flashy. Not the kind of person who sold himself aggressively. But steady. Reliable. The kind of person people kept once they worked with him. So why was everything slipping? That question sat in the back of my mind for weeks. Until that night. Until that call. Until I heard my dad say, I wouldn't trust him with anything serious. After that, I couldn't unsee it. The next time Daniel mentioned a name, I paid attention. The next time I visited my dad, I listened. At first, it felt like coincidence. Then it started lining up too cleanly. A name Daniel mentioned would come up in one of my dad's conversations. A company Daniel was talking to would suddenly become someone my dad had heard something about. It wasn't direct. That's what made it so effective. My dad wasn't calling people and saying, "Don't hire him." He was planting doubt. Just enough. Just the right tone. The right phrasing. "I've heard some concerns. You might want to look into it. I'm just saying, be careful." And that was all it took. Because in the kind of circles my dad operated in, reputation was everything. Once that was there, it didn't matter if it was true. I started noticing how often my dad was on the phone. How casually he'd bring up names. How easily he'd shift conversations in a direction that made someone hesitate. And the more I saw, the more one thing became clear. This wasn't random. This wasn't him reacting. This was intentional. Controlled. And worst of all, he believed he was right. I confronted him a few days after that first call. I didn't plan it. I didn't rehearse anything. I just walked into his office, closed the door behind me, and said it. "Are you interfering with Daniel's work?" He didn't flinch. Didn't even look surprised. He just leaned back slightly in his chair and looked at me like I'd asked him something obvious. "I'm looking out for you," he said. That was it. No denial. No hesitation. Just justification. "You're ruining his career," I said. My voice was steady, but I could feel something underneath it building. "If he's as capable as you think he is," he replied, "this won't matter." I stared at him. "You're calling his clients," I said. "You're telling them not to trust him." "I'm sharing information," he corrected calmly. "What information?" I asked. He didn't answer that. He didn't need to. Because the answer wasn't real. It was whatever he needed it to be. And that's when it hit me. Daniel was at home, trying to fix a problem that didn't exist. Trying to improve something that wasn't broken. While my dad sat here, deciding which parts of his life got to work and which didn't. Like it was a test. Like Daniel had to prove something to him. And if he didn't, then he deserved to fail. I walked out of that office knowing one thing. If I handled this the way I wanted to, my dad would win. Again. And I couldn't let that happen. So I didn't tell Daniel. Not yet. Instead, I started watching. I didn't tell Daniel. That decision didn't feel big at the time. It didn't feel like a turning point. It felt temporary. Like I just needed a few days to think, to understand what my dad was really doing before I made it real by saying it out loud. But days turned into a week. Then 2. And everything got worse. It didn't happen all at once. That would have been easier to see, easier to fight against. Instead, it kept coming in small hits. Quiet ones. The kind you can explain away if you want to. A missed callback. A meeting that suddenly got rescheduled and never came back. A client who said they needed more time and then just disappeared. And every time it happened, Daniel handled it the same way. He adjusted. I'd watch him at the kitchen table, laptop open, scrolling through emails, rereading conversations like there was something hidden between the lines. "Maybe I pushed too hard here," he said one night, tapping the screen. "You didn't," I replied. He didn't argue. He just nodded like he heard me, but didn't fully believe it. That was the part that started getting to me. Not the lost deals. Not even my dad. It was the way Daniel started turning everything inward. Like the problem had to be him. A few days later, I came home earlier than usual. The apartment was quiet, but his laptop was open on the dining table. I wasn't trying to snoop. I wasn't even thinking. I just saw the screen. An email draft. Subject line, follow-up. It was long. Longer than anything Daniel would normally send. He kept things clean, direct, professional. This one felt different. Apologetic. He was explaining himself. Over-explaining. Trying to reassure someone who hadn't even accused him of anything directly. "I just want to make sure there were no concerns regarding my reliability or communication." I stopped reading. My chest tightened in a way I didn't expect. Because those weren't his words. Those were planted. That doubt didn't come from him. It came from somewhere else. From someone else. And I knew exactly who. That night, he didn't bring it up. He just sat across from me, eating quietly, like he was somewhere else in his head. "You okay?" I asked. "Yeah," he said automatically. Then, after a second, just thinking. "About what?" He hesitated. "Maybe I should start looking at something more stable." I froze. "What do you mean?" "I don't know," he said, shrugging lightly, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Something in-house. Less client-dependent. More predictable. That's not what you want." "I want consistency," he replied. There was no frustration in his voice. No anger. Just tired acceptance. And that scared me more than anything. Because this wasn't Daniel reacting. This was Daniel adjusting his entire life around a problem he didn't cause. I wanted to tell him. Right there. I could have said it. I could have told him everything about my dad, about the calls, about how none of this was his fault. but I saw it play out in my head. He'd get angry. Of course he would. He'd want to confront my dad. And my dad would sit there, calm, controlled, and deny everything. Or worse, twist it. Make it sound like Daniel was paranoid, unstable. And in the circles my dad operated in, that would spread faster than anything else. Daniel wouldn't just lose clients. He'd lose credibility entirely. So I stayed quiet. And instead, I started watching more carefully. I paid attention to names, to patterns, to timing. One afternoon, Daniel mentioned another client, Thomas Garcia, a truck driver who'd recently expanded into managing a small fleet. He needed software support, tracking systems, something Daniel specialized in. He sounded good, Daniel said. Straightforward. No games. When are you meeting him? I asked. Next week. I nodded, filing the name away. 2 days later, I stopped by my dad's office again. I told myself it was normal, that I was just visiting, that I wasn't looking for anything. But I listened. And sure enough, I heard it. Not directly. Never directly. But close enough. You might want to double-check before committing, my dad said into the phone. I've heard a few things. My stomach dropped. He didn't say Daniel's name. He didn't need to. The timing was too exact. The pattern too clear. When I left his office that day, I didn't feel shocked anymore. I felt certain. And that certainty changed something. Because now, it wasn't just suspicion. It was proof. Not the kind I could show someone yet. But enough for me. That night, Daniel got a message. He read it, stared at the screen for a few seconds, then locked his phone and set it face down on the table. I didn't ask right away. I already knew. But I needed to hear it. What happened? I said quietly. He exhaled. Garcia canceled. Why? He didn't really say. Just that he's going in a different direction. I nodded slowly. Okay, that was it. That was all I said. And something in his expression shifted. Not relief. Not comfort. Just confirmation. Like my reaction matched what he was already starting to believe. That this was normal. That this was expected. And I hated myself for that. Because in that moment, I realized something I hadn't fully admitted yet. By staying quiet, I wasn't just letting my dad do this. I was helping him. That thought sat with me longer than anything else. It followed me into work. Into conversations. Into the quiet moments where I didn't have anything to distract myself with. And it started turning into something else. Not guilt. Not exactly. Something sharper. More focused. Because if I was already part of this, then I needed to decide what role I was playing. And I didn't want to be the one watching anymore. A few nights later, Daniel hit his breaking point. It wasn't loud. That's what made it worse. He didn't slam anything. Didn't raise his voice. He just sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the floor. I don't get it, he said. I sat next to him, waiting. I'm doing everything the same, he continued. Same approach. Same quality. Same effort. He rubbed his hands together slowly, like he was trying to ground himself. But something's off. I didn't say anything. I feel like I'm walking into conversations where the decision's already been made, he said. My chest tightened. Like they already think something about me, and I don't know what it is. That was it. That was the moment. Because he wasn't wrong. He was finally seeing it. Just not clearly enough. I could have told him then. I almost did. I opened my mouth. Then closed it again. Because if I told him now, he'd act. And if he acted, my dad would adjust. He'd get more careful. More controlled. And whatever chance I had of stopping this completely would disappear. So instead, I reached for his hand. You're not the problem, I said. He looked at me searching. You're just in the wrong environment. It wasn't a lie. But it wasn't the truth either. And somehow, that made it worse. Because that was the moment I stopped thinking about stopping my dad. And started thinking about ending him. I just didn't know how yet. But I was going to figure it out. After that night, I stopped waiting for things to happen. I started paying attention like it mattered. Not emotionally. Not reactively. Strategically. That shift didn't feel dramatic. It wasn't some big moment where everything clicked. It was quieter than that. Colder. Like something in me just settled into place. Because if my dad was going to treat Daniel's life like a system he could control, then I needed to understand the system. I started with the obvious. His calls. My dad was always on the phone. That wasn't new. But now I listened differently. Not just to what he said, but when he said it, who he said it to, and what happened afterward. Patterns started forming. At first, they were loose. A name here. A company there. But the more I tracked it, the clearer it became. There was always a lead-in. He never jumped straight into doubt. He built into it. How's business been lately? I heard you've been expanding. Must be hard finding reliable people. He let them talk first. Then, when the conversation was open enough, he'd slide it in. Just be careful who you bring in. I've heard some concerns. Nothing direct. Nothing actionable. Just enough to shift the tone. And after that, everything changed. I started writing things down. At first, it was just notes in my phone. Names, dates, times. Then I got more specific. Who he called before a deal fell through. How long the call lasted. What Daniel said afterward. I wasn't even sure what I was building. Just that I needed something real. Something that proved this wasn't in my head. A week into this, I noticed something new. My dad wasn't just calling people Daniel was working with. He was getting ahead of him. That was the part one hadn't fully understood before. He wasn't reacting to Daniel's deals. He was intercepting them. One afternoon, Daniel mentioned a new lead. Nathan Avery, restaurant owner, expanding into a second location in University City. He reached out to me directly, Daniel said, sitting across from me at the kitchen table. Said he got my name from someone. That's good, I replied carefully. Yeah, he said, nodding. Feels different. Different. I held onto that word. Because this one hadn't gone through my dad's usual network. At least not yet. That night, I went to my dad's office. I didn't announce it. Didn't call ahead. I just showed up. He was at his desk like always. Phone in one hand, pen in the other, writing something down as he spoke. He saw me through the glass and gave me a small nod, like I was expected. I stayed quiet. Waited. Listened. Yeah, University City expansion, right? He said. That's a big move. My stomach dropped. He turned slightly in his chair, lowering his voice. Just make sure you're bringing in the right people. You don't want issues this early. I didn't need to hear the name. I already knew. Nathan Avery. Again. Before Daniel even had a real chance. That was when it became undeniable. This wasn't influence. This was control. I left without saying anything. I didn't confront him this time. Because now I understood something I hadn't before. Confronting him wouldn't stop him. It would just make him better at hiding it. And I needed him visible. Careless. Comfortable. So I changed how I acted around him. I stopped pushing back. When he made comments about Daniel, I didn't argue. When he hinted that Daniel wasn't stable enough, I stayed quiet. The first time I did it, I felt sick. The second time, it felt easier. By the third, he noticed. You're starting to see it, he said one afternoon, leaning back in his chair. I didn't respond. Just gave a small shrug. People don't change overnight, he continued. Patterns matter. I nodded slightly. And that was all it took. After that, he stopped filtering himself around me. That was the opening I needed. He started taking calls in front of me. Not all of them. But enough. Enough for me to hear names clearly. Enough for me to understand how often he was doing this. It wasn't occasional. It was constant. Every day, multiple times a day. And the more comfortable he got, the more careless he became. That's when I started recording. Not everything. Just what I could legally capture. Short clips. Key moments. Enough to establish tone, intent, pattern. I kept everything organized. Dates. Names. Context. At night, while Daniel sat across from me trying to fix things that weren't his fault, I was building something. Quietly. Carefully. And the worst part was, Daniel was getting worse. Not in skill. Not in ability. In confidence. That was what my dad was really destroying. I saw it in small ways at first. Hesitation before sending emails. Second-guessing decisions he used to make instantly. Then it got more obvious. One night, he asked me to read over a message before he sent it. That had never happened before. Just tell me if this sounds okay, he said, handing me his phone. I read it. It was polite. Professional. But underneath that, there was something else. An apology that wasn't necessary. A need for reassurance that shouldn't have been there. It's fine, I said. He watched my face like he was looking for something more. You sure? Yeah. He nodded, but I could tell he still wasn't convinced. That was the moment I realized something else. My dad wasn't just blocking opportunities. He was reshaping Daniel. Turning him into someone who doubted himself enough that even if the opportunities came back, he might not take them the same way. And that made everything feel heavier. Because this wasn't temporary damage. This was lasting. A few days later, I found something I wasn't looking for. I was in my dad's office again. He had stepped out to take a call in the hallway, leaving his desk open. I wasn't planning to go through anything. I told myself that. But then I saw it. A folder on his desktop. No label that stood out. Just something slightly out of place. I don't know why I clicked it. Maybe I already knew I would. Inside were documents. Not client lists. Not normal business files. Financial records. Payments. Transfers. Some labeled. Some not. Amounts that didn't match any service I'd ever heard him describe. Companies that didn't seem real. Or at least, not fully. I scrolled slowly, trying to make sense of it. It didn't. Not completely. But one thing was clear. This wasn't clean. I didn't need to understand every detail to know that. My heart started beating faster. Not from fear. From clarity. Because now, this wasn't just about Daniel anymore. This was bigger. And for the first time since all of this started, I had something that wasn't just observation. It was leverage. I closed the folder just before he walked back in. He didn't notice anything. Just sat down, picked up where he left off, completely unaware of what I had just seen. And that was the moment everything shifted. Because now, I wasn't just reacting to what he was doing. I had something he wouldn't be able to control. I just needed to decide how far I was willing to go. I didn't act right away. That's the part people would probably expect, some instant decision, some emotional reaction where I took everything I found and used it immediately. But that's not what happened. Because the second I saw those files, I understood something I hadn't fully accepted until then. If I moved too fast, I'd lose. Not because I was wrong, but because my dad had been doing this longer than I had been paying attention. He knew how to protect himself. So I waited. And for the first time, the waiting didn't feel passive. It felt intentional. Calculated. The next time I saw him, I acted normal. More than normal, actually. Agreeable. Quiet. I didn't question him. Didn't challenge anything he said about Daniel. I let him believe I had finally accepted his version of things. That Daniel wasn't reliable. That he wasn't stable. That he needed to be managed. I hated every second of it. But it worked. He relaxed around me. Even more than before. He started talking more freely, not just about people, but about decisions. How you handle risk is everything, he said one afternoon, leaning back in his chair while we sat in his office. You don't wait for problems. You anticipate them. I nodded slightly. And sometimes, he continued, you have to make decisions for people before they even realize they need help. Help. That word stuck with me. Because that's what he thought this was. Not control. Not damage. Help. I kept my face neutral. Does that always work? I asked. He smiled faintly. It works when you're right. That was the moment I stopped hoping he would see what he was doing. Because he already did. He just believed it was justified. That same night, Daniel came home later than usual. Not from a meeting. From walking. I could tell by the way his shoes were slightly damp, like he'd been outside longer than he planned. You didn't drive? I asked. He shook his head, setting his keys down. Just needed to clear my head. I didn't push. I waited. He sat down slowly, like everything took more effort than it used to. I got passed over again, he said. I didn't ask which one. It didn't matter anymore. They said they're going with someone who feels like a better fit, he added, making small air quotes with his fingers. Better fit. That was new. That wasn't about skill. That was about perception. Did they say why? I asked. He let out a quiet breath. No. Just that. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, staring at the floor. I don't get it anymore. That hit harder than anything he'd said before. Not frustration. Not anger. Just confusion. Like the ground under him had shifted, and he couldn't figure out where to stand. I feel like I'm walking into rooms where people already decided who I am, he said. My chest tightened. Because that was exactly what was happening. I can see it in their faces, he continued. They're polite. They listen. But it's already done. I sat next to him. Close enough that our shoulders touched. You're not the problem, I said quietly. He didn't answer right away. Then, it has to be me. No. It does, he said, more firmly this time. Because if it's not me, then what is it? I didn't have an answer I could give him. Not one that wouldn't break everything open. So I stayed quiet. And in that silence, I made the decision. Not emotionally. Not out of anger. Out of clarity. I wasn't going to confront my dad again. I wasn't going to argue with him. I was going to remove him. Completely. The next few days, I went back through everything I had collected. Call logs. Recordings. Notes. Patterns. Then I added what I found on his computer. Carefully. I didn't take anything directly. I didn't send anything from his system. I recreated it. Screenshots. Transcriptions. Anything that couldn't be traced back to a single obvious action. I wasn't just gathering proof. I was building something that could stand on its own. Something that didn't rely on me being believed. Because I knew how this would go if it came back to me. My dad would deny everything. He'd twist it. Make it sound like I misunderstood. Or worse. Like Daniel influenced me. And suddenly, Daniel wouldn't just be unreliable. He'd be manipulative. So I removed myself from it entirely. I found someone who handled financial compliance cases. Not through my dad's network. Not through anyone connected to him. Someone completely outside of it. Christopher Miller. I didn't tell him everything. Not at first. I just asked questions. What happens if a business is routing payments through unofficial channels? What kind of documentation matters? What would trigger an investigation? He answered carefully. Professionally. Without assumptions. And that's how I knew he was the right person. I didn't give him everything right away. I let him guide it. Piece by piece. Until it became something bigger than a conversation. Something that had to be looked at. Something that couldn't be ignored. I never told my dad. Never warned him. I just stepped back and waited. The investigation didn't feel real at first. Nothing obvious changed. No sudden collapse. No dramatic confrontation. Just small things. Subtle shifts. My dad taking more calls than usual. Meetings that ran longer. A slight edge in his voice when he thought no one was paying attention. Then one day I noticed something new. Silence. Not complete, but different. His calls were shorter. More careful. More controlled. He started stepping out of the room again. Closing doors. That's when I knew. It had started. And there was nothing he could do to stop it. That same week, Daniel sat across from me at the kitchen table, staring at his laptop. "I think I'm done," he said. I looked up. "What do you mean?" "With this," he replied, gesturing vaguely at the screen. "This whole setup. I can't keep doing this." My chest tightened. Not because I disagreed, but because of how he said it. Not defeated. Just finished. "I've been applying to in-house roles," he added. "Something more stable. Less dependent on all this." I nodded slowly. "That's good." He looked at me like he expected resistance. Like he expected me to remind him this wasn't the plan. But I didn't. Because for the first time, this actually was the way out. "I just want something that makes sense again," he said. "It will," I replied. And this time, I meant it. Because what he didn't know was, the thing breaking his world apart was already starting to break. It didn't happen all at once. There was no single moment where everything collapsed, no loud announcement, no scene where my dad was suddenly exposed in front of everyone. It was quieter than that. Slower. The same way Daniel's life had been pulled apart. At first, it was small things. Calls that didn't get returned. Meetings that got postponed. People who used to answer right away suddenly taking longer, or not responding at all. I noticed it before my dad said anything. He started checking his phone more often. Not in an obvious way. Just more frequently than usual. Like he was expecting something that wasn't coming. Then came the questions. Not from me. From him. "Have you heard anything about delays with certain accounts?" he asked one afternoon, trying to sound casual. I shook my head. "No." He studied me for a second longer than necessary, like he was trying to read something that wasn't there. Then he nodded and moved on. But the calm wasn't the same anymore. There was tension underneath it. Subtle. Controlled. But there. A few days later, I saw the first article. It wasn't even about him directly. Just a small piece buried in a business section online. Something about irregularities in consulting transactions. Unverified client structures. Financial inconsistencies under review. No names. Not yet. But I knew. And judging by the way my dad's tone shifted on his calls, he knew too. He started closing doors again. Taking conversations outside. Lowering his voice. But it didn't matter. Because whatever had started was already moving. The following week, it got clearer. People began distancing themselves. Not aggressively. Not publicly. Just quietly. The same way they had done with Daniel. Conversations shortened. Meetings canceled. Responses delayed. It was almost identical. And that was the part that stayed with me. Because I wasn't watching something new happen. I was watching the same pattern. Just in reverse. One evening, my dad called me. I almost didn't answer. But I did. "Jessica," he said. My name sounded different in his voice. Not weak. But uncertain. I had never heard that before. "Yeah. Have you heard anything about what's going on?" he asked. "Like what?" He paused. "Just for a second. Some of my accounts are being reviewed," he said carefully. "There's confusion about certain transactions." Confusion. I leaned back slightly in my chair, staring out the window. "I haven't heard anything," I said. And I meant it. Because by that point, it wasn't something I was controlling anymore. It was already in motion. "Okay," he said slowly. "Then, after a pause, if you hear anything, let me know." "I will." We hung up. And for a long time, I just sat there. Because for the first time in my life, he didn't sound in control. The next few weeks unfolded the way I expected. No explosions. No dramatic confrontations. Just erosion. Clients pulling away. Accounts freezing. Questions turning into formal reviews. And eventually, names being attached. His. It wasn't a scandal. Not in the way people imagine. It was quieter. More professional. More final. The kind of thing that doesn't make headlines. But ends everything anyway. I didn't go to see him when it all came out. I didn't need to. I already knew what it looked like. Because I had watched him do it to someone else. Daniel got the job offer a few weeks later. In-house position. Stable company. No dependency on outside clients. No exposure to my dad's network. When he told me, there was something in his voice I hadn't heard in months. Relief. Not excitement. Not celebration. Just relief. "I think this is going to be better," he said. "It will," I replied. And this time, There was no hesitation. Because the thing that had been quietly tearing his life apart was gone. Or at least, couldn't reach him anymore. We moved forward after that. Not instantly. Not perfectly. There were still moments where he second-guessed himself. Still times where he hesitated before making decisions he used to make without thinking. But slowly, that started to fade. And in its place, something steadier came back. As for my dad, we don't talk much anymore. Not because we had some big fallout. There was no final argument. No confrontation. Just distance. He still exists in my life in the smallest ways. A missed call. A message I don't answer right away. A name on my phone that doesn't carry the same weight it used to. I think he knows. Not exactly what I did, but enough. Enough to understand that something shifted. And that I wasn't standing on his side anymore. Sometimes, I think about telling Daniel everything. Sitting him down and explaining it from the beginning. The calls. The patterns. What my dad was doing. What I did in response. But then I picture it. The way he'd look at me. Not angry. Not even hurt. Just trying to understand. And I don't know if I could explain it in a way that wouldn't change how he sees me. Because I had a chance to stop it earlier. I could have told him the moment I knew. I could have confronted my dad harder. Forced something to happen before it got worse. But I didn't. I waited. I watched. I let it build. I let Daniel struggle. Just long enough. Long enough for my dad to feel it too. And I don't know what that says about me. If I was protecting him. Or using him. If this was justice. Or just a cleaner version of revenge. Because the truth is, I didn't just stop my dad. I learned how to do exactly what he did. I just used it against him instead. And now that everything's quiet again, that's the part one can't ignore. So I don't know. If you were in my position, would you have done it differently? Or would you have waited too, just to make sure it actually ended?